Hi there, everyone. Welcome back to el podcast del Salón de Idiomas. Hi, Rox. How are you doing?
I'm fine. What about you?
Well, actually, I can't complain.
Is there anything you have to complain about?
I mean, why? No. Why would that be?
Well, because you said I can't complain, so like if I take that word for word, it would mean that you might have something to complain about.
No, it's just like everything is in order. Like everything is fine. Like yeah, that's it. That's it. But yeah, I think that plenty of our listeners have been stumbling upon these kind of confusions. For instance, like one that took me by surprise is when I was talking to a student and I told her, "Well, I'm not gonna lie," and then she was like, "Well, do you usually lie? Like, is that like, are you dishonest?"
Yeah.
The rest of the time, it's like, no, that's not what I meant. And so there are plenty of these expressions that people actually get confused about that are supernatural for English speakers.
Indeed, definitely. And I think that's what fluency is about.
Yeah. And again, this is what we're going to be discussing. We're going to quickly go through some expressions that are not necessarily idioms. However, they are just as natural as sunlight, and people just still have a really big issue with them. For instance, that one. So now I have to ask you, when you were learning Spanish, did something like that come across, like an expression that you were like, what are you talking about? And it was like the very most common thing ever?
Yeah, for instance, one of the things that really struck my attention, like when I think back then, was the fact that I remember one of my colleagues, she was a classmate, she said, no seas tonta. And I was like, like, oh my
what?
God, okay. So in my mother tongue, telling someone like that is like, you are stupid, but like it's such an insult. And I was like, I remember like watching her and she said, oh, don't take it, like don't take it personally. It's just the way of, and I remember she told me, no seas tonta, because I was just horsing around, doing stupid things. And it was just an expression like, okay, stop exaggerating, but I didn't get it.
Yeah. And you were like, wow, I didn't know that it was such a big deal. I'm so sorry. I will stop existing or something.
Yeah. So yeah, that was the first impact. And I realized that, meanings may vary from, like the context in certain.
Yeah. And that's what I would like to go through, because like language is not just the words and what they mean. It's also what the people mean when they are using it regarding context. And this actually takes us to one of the biggest branches of linguistics that I love is pragmatics.
Okay, I do love pragmatics as well.
Yeah, and what we can understand from pragmatics is we can just simply consider that grammar explains how words fit together, and vocabulary tells us what words mean. However, pragmatics basically tells us how people actually use those words regarding whatever context they are in between. And then we have like these examples.
Definition. Yeah.
Yeah,
That was
I
a perfect
practiced that
definition.
one.
And I also have one. I also have another one. It's like fluency, or I'm not sure whether we have it. Fluency is not the ability to understand words, but the ability to understand intentions.
Wow. I feel like that's one of those sentences that I'm going to have on my WhatsApp.
Status.
My WhatsApp status for a couple of weeks. Wow, that's actually very nice. But yeah, actually, it truly shows what we are supposed to be doing whenever we're communicating. And that's something that we tend to forget. And this is also a little bit of I would say that like self-awareness issue that sometimes as teachers, we tend to have like a very rigid way to convey the information that, of course, it has worked plenty of times. Nevertheless, sometimes we forget to address other things, like how people feel about certain words.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's, like when you teach a language, it tends to be pretty mechanic.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we might be missing either when teaching or when learning, if you're a student, is, like learning how to read between the lines.
Yeah, exactly. And that actually rings a bell with something else that I have seen, but that's perhaps something that I don't want to get like too much in that rabbit hole. And so let's actually just come back to something that I wanted to mention. That, for instance, we tend to take like things too literal, and that actually is an issue, which is what we're addressing here. And that also happens us as with teachers. Like whenever I'm just telling like a really simple sentence, and like, what does that mean? Like that doesn't make sense. I'll be like, oh, come on, like that's like the sentence. Like for instance, when I'm saying it's getting late, that basically means like we should get going. But it's like, what, you're acknowledging the passive time? Like, no, I'm not doing that. Like I'm actually just telling you. But that I stopped for a second. It's like that's a common confusion that many people would have, and that helps me to also like kind of like revigorize the idea of being a teacher, because like you can actually take it in a very new perspective of how you're teaching something in the first place. Even though that is something that you have done it a million times, now you get a new perspective. And I feel like that also helps you to eventually have a new approach for future students. And that's what experience is like, I guess.
And I think this is what makes a good teacher. Like being aware of these nuances makes you vary and tailor the way you teach, so your students can have like a fully comprehend, like holistic immersion, bearing in mind specifically all these, nuances, as I've just said.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, this actually goes really well with the sentence that one of my students loves so much. I taught him that sentence, and I remember that he would use it in every single class.
Which one is it?
Well, it is what it is. It was like he was just telling me like he wanted to express that we have to just accept that things cannot be changed.
Yeah.
But he was like, yeah, I gotta work, and then I have to like study, and then I have to like also like hang out with my friends because I don't wanna like just feel sad. So I feel like sometimes I don't have like enough time, but like, how do I
Yeah.
how do I say that? It's like, well, it is what it is. And I could literally see his eyes opening and being like, wow, this has helped me so much. And literally every time he was like, yeah, well, I did this X and Y during the weekend. Well, it is what it is.
Yeah, definitely. And the funny thing is, like, if you think of it, pragmatics makes most of the meaning of the whatever we try to convey, or the language and the communication.
Yeah. And now this is actually what I would like to go now, which is, why does that happen? So now there are many details about this as to how that happens. And for instance, we have to consider that people are trying to always be efficient with their time. Okay. That is one of the reasons why. Like, we tend to just not overly complicate sentences that can be understood in simple terms, okay?
Yeah, so we don't overcomplicate that, but then we resort to metaphors. So yeah, I got it. Yeah,
I guess that's when you want to spice up the language a little bit more.
Yeah, so then, like the biggest challenge for the ones learning is like how to interpret something.
Yeah. And it helps tremendously due to the fact that it's something that acknowledges that you have to keep the conversation going. And that is actually one of the reasons why people tend to struggle quite a bunch with long conversations. It could also somewhat explain why in many cases you are allowed, or you are capable of understanding what people are saying. However, whenever you are trying to produce, due to the fact that you haven't internalized all these expressions, it tends to be difficult. As a matter of fact, for instance, going back with my student, he was struggling to explain a feeling that he wanted to just point it out.
Yeah.
That he accepts what reality is like, even though that he has like so many things on his mind, and he has a lot of things on his plate as well. Like, it could be just simplified by just saying it is what it is.
Yeah. Definitely. Okay. Yeah. Well, and my question is here, how would someone, placing ourselves in a learner's shoes, how would someone learn how to get these hints, how to read between the lines, and how to get better at actually mastering the language?
Well, I was going to say interesting. However, that's another word that we love to use for whenever we actually don't really agree with the other person, or we need them to explain further. When you're saying something and say interesting, and that's basically like, I don't really agree with you. I need you to convince me otherwise.
Yeah.
So What was the thing that you were saying? Sorry, I lost it.
Yeah, no, basically, it's like with all this indirectness and how could someone learn, because it's not the same learning by following a textbook. We know that for sure. You can learn grammar, you can learn vocabulary, as long as you don't place it into a context. You won't basically manage and master a language. Now, if we were to learn English for the first time, how would this learner, grasp all these indirect meanings, read between the lines, get the hints? In this case, like fully immersing themselves into like culturally going to this specific place where the language is spoken, so that way they can get to learn, like the pragmatics of the language. Or is it like any other way of fully immersing yourself into the language and learning the pragmatics?
Well, I think that I am not like revolutionizing language learning by saying that, of course, it helps tremendously to be immersed in the language as much as you can, depending on whatever situation you're in. If you are capable of traveling around, or if you can just watch movies, and like any kind of context when you see people actually interacting. This is where, of course, reading tends to lack, as you don't necessarily see how people are interacting. You can imagine that, however, you don't see it. So, of course, it's a little bit difficult to imitate it. Now, however, something that people tend to undermine is that the necessity of let's say, fixate some simpler terms, okay? What I mean with that, this is something that I see that I ended up translating to other parts of learning with my students. Whenever we are like practicing for a new exam, the first thing that we always teach them is to be comfortable with the connectors, right?
Yeah.
For instance, like saying because, we don't want to say because, we're going to say something like given that or due to the fact that, right?
Yeah.
And it seems silly. It's just a simple word. However, they struggle so much with it. It's like the biggest task ever. And like they cannot wrap their hands around it. It's like, but why do I like have such a problem with it? It's not that you necessarily have a problem with that. It's just that the other thing has just become so comfortable for you that you don't even think about it whenever you're using it. Like you have to actually think to change those connectors. So what I'm trying to get is that you can translate that to something else. Like you have to become more comfortable with using these expressions, like learning how to use them and use them over and over again until they just become like a second nature.
You made a very good point here, and I'm telling you this since I have observed that, throughout the years, like at least teaching, I realized that people just believe that with a fully immersive speaking course, it will be enough for them to become fluent. Now, don't get me wrong, you can become fluent like grammarly and even in terms of, some vocabulary. However, if you don't vary and if you don't force yourself to gradually introduce and phase in different expressions, different synonyms, eventually you will be like really, speaking fast, having even a good pronunciation and intonation. But it's not just about that. It's about like varying and amplifying more your vocabulary and everything. So eventually you can get the context of basically the language you're using.
Yeah. Yeah. And in many cases, this is something that we have to also be really acknowledged about, is that even though that when we get like really, really, really capable of transmitting many ideas, then the other thing also happens that we tend to miss what the other person is trying to point out, like, or we just simply cannot follow up. And this has happened in many cases. Like, for instance, I have students that they are capable of explaining a really good sentence, and then when it goes to the part of like having a conversation, then they say something really nice, and then I just reply to what they say, and then they just move on to something completely different, because like they eventually they say, well, I understood what you said. It's just that for some reason, I just didn't know how to follow it up, and I just have like think about it for so long, and it's not something really complicated. Something like, well, what do you think about me practicing football? Like something like that.
Yeah, I got it.
And it was like, and the other person was talking about how good practicing football is in the first place. However, like the moment to reply that, it was, then eventually I just noticed that plenty of those problems come from not being able to start. Like just the moment that if they have a little sentence where they can start, then everything comes smoothly. And then I told her, like, why don't you say something like, well, that perfectly suits you.
Yeah.
And that what does that mean? Like, suit you? It's like, well, I mean that it's something that goes with you. And like, it's something that you could do effortlessly. And I was like, okay, suits you. Wow, that sounds good. And then with that, then he was able to continue with like, well, that perfectly suits you due to the fact that you were very active and blah 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 blah. So yeah.
Okay, so I guess that the funny thing of everything over here would be just to be more observative.
Yeah.
To try to force yourself to introduce a more varied vocabulary, expose yourself to the language. And when it comes to exposure, I would really, really focus as well on reading, so you can get more about the pragmatics and context a lot from reading. And of course, speaking. Is there anything else you would add?
Well, my bad. I'm not mean that I did a bad thing. It's just like I just made a little mistake. I was going to point out something else. Sorry, my bad. Anyhow, yeah, no, I truly consider that this could all just summarize to being a little bit more acknowledged of the fact that language is not as mechanical as we would like to try to make it like to be. It's much more organic, okay?
Definitely.
And that's overall something that you have to keep in mind. It's not just also like these expressions can work perfectly fine in the way that we are just pointing out how we can use them. However, you also have to consider how the person is intending to do so. For instance, like that sentence, like for instance saying, maybe.
Yeah.
Like has so many different meanings depending on what the conversation is going like. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think being, well, if you think of it, like one of the skills you need in order to learn whatever it takes, whatever you want to learn in life, is not just about the language, is being really observative and trying to pay attention to, you know, the hints, to the context, to the body language. So that way, if you are, and now coming back to English, it's not about translating, even though it does help, you know, to get by and for basic stuff. It's about learning what the intention of the others are. And you wouldn't be able to do that if you were not to be observative.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. So it's getting late.
So we can call it a day.
Yeah.
Shall we call it a day?
Yeah, we can call it a day. Absolutely. Well, I hope that you liked that. If you liked these kind of discussions about how we can use pragmatics and make it a bit more seamless, you can always let us know in the comments. And well, see you on the next one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.